This is the story of a husband and wife that found one of the largest treasure troves in American history, only to have him shot for it and the government to step in and steal the rest of it from right under her feet. This is the story of the Victorio Peak treasure. This is Milton Doc Noss and his wife Ova Babe Beckwith. Doc and Babe settled down in Hot Springs, New Mexico, which is now called Truth or Consequences, in 1933. They started a foot clinic in Hot Springs, even though Doc was by no means a doctor and only had a 10th grade education. But they were both outdoors people, they were adventurers, they were treasure hunters, and they were always out looking for a new adventure. In 1937, Doc was out deer hunting with a group of friends and also treasure hunting because Doc was always treasure hunting. And they were out near Victorio Peak when it started to rain. When it started raining, Doc hid on the side of Victorio Peak underneath an outcrop. And while he was sitting there, he felt a breeze underneath his leg. So he looked down and he noticed that the boulder that he was on was not quite right. It looked misplaced. So he got down and started digging around it, and he noticed as he was able to pull the dirt away that there was a hole underneath. When he was finally able to move the boulder, he looked down and he noticed that this hole was not just any hole, it was actually man-made. It was a man-made mine, he thought at the time. When he looked down into the shaft, he noticed that there were wooden posts that were actually stand up that had been placed in there by man. He knew that this was a man-made shaft, and he also really wanted to get down there and see what was inside. But he also didn't want the other people that he was with to know that it was there, just because he didn't want to share what was inside. So when they were finished hunting, Doc went back and he told his wife Babe about everything that he had found, that he found that shaft, and they immediately went back out there and they started looking in the shaft. So Doc thought this was pretty dangerous and he didn't want his wife going down and getting hurt or getting trapped in there. So she stayed up top, he tied off a rope and he took some flashlights and he went down into the shaft. What he found was a bunch of different caves, a bunch of different caverns going off in different directions. Some looked natural, some looked man-made, but he just went back and he started exploring them. One of the first things he found when he was down there was a skeleton that had been tied up, bound with its arms around its back, and had been left there to die. And it wasn't just one skeleton, he actually found 27 skeletons. But he also started finding old artifacts and ancient conquistador armor and boxes of Wells Fargo gold and all of these different treasures. And he also found what he believed at the time was iron bars. He took some of the artifacts and some of the gold up, he showed it to his wife up top and said, this it's full of this, and there's also these iron bars, and she said those can't be iron, get back down there and bring one of them up. So he went back down, he kind of estimated how many bars there were, and he found the lightest one, the smallest one that was still extremely heavy. He went back up, and he had estimated that there were approximately 16,000 of these bars. He showed it to his wife, she dusted it off, and sure enough, it was gold. The entirety of this treasure would later on be estimated to be worth about $2 billion. So over the course of the next few years, Doc would go down, he would get some of this. He ended up bringing up about 200 of those gold bars. But at the same time, they also made probably the biggest mistake that they made during this time period as well. They actually filed mining and treasure trove claims on the land with the New Mexico government. So at this point, Doc started taking out these treasures and taking out the gold, and he started burying it in various places around the desert. There was a problem at the time. So the problem at the time was that the Gold Reserve Act took effect in 1934. Essentially what this was that up until this time, all money, all currency was potentially backed by gold or theoretically backed by gold. So it probably wasn't at this point. There was probably more money out there in circulation than what the gold reserves actually were, and this was a problem. So the federal government actually put a ban on buying and selling and actually owning gold, and anybody who owned gold had to turn it into the government. This made it very difficult for Doc and Babe to actually go out and sell any of their gold. So then in 1939, the U.S. Treasury Department sent out agents to go evaluate the land and evaluate the treasure trove. The problem is the entrance into this mine was very narrow. Doc was very skinny, and he would kind of shimmy down and he could get down in there. The agents were not as small and as skinny as he is, so they hired a professional to bring out dynamite and actually blow out the entrance to the cave to make it wider so more people could fit in. What ended up happening was they used too much dynamite. When they detonated it, the top of Victorio Peak actually collapsed, sealing off the mine. So for about 10 years, Doc was selling off small amounts of this gold and making a living basically off of that. And in 1945, his marriage kind of fell apart. He ended up divorcing Babe, and a couple years later, he married another woman. During all of this time, he just had these little hoards buried out in the desert that he was digging up and selling off, and the treasure trove was still just buried underneath this rock, and no one had been able to get to it. So in 1948, he decided that he was going to go back out there, he was going to get to it, and he hired an oil rig man to come out and drill down, and he gave him $25,000 to go out and drill down, make a hole so he could get down and get to his treasure. What they found out was that Babe had actually moved in and filed a claim for the area, so the property rights were actually up in the air, and he wasn't allowed to go out and do this. Because of this, he feared that the man that he offered this money to was going to come after him. So he went out and actually dug up the gold that the other man knew where it was. He dug it up and he moved it. So the oil man's name was Charles Ryan. On March 5th, 1949, Charles Ryan wanted payment for the work that he was supposed to do. That he was under contract, he was hired, and he was supposed to do this work, and he wanted his $25,000. No one really knows what happens right here, but Doc was running towards his truck, and Charles Ryan shot him in the head. Charles Ryan claimed that he fired several warning shots that Doc was supposed to stop. He thought that Doc was running for a gun, and he ended up having to shoot him in self-defense, and that actually got him acquitted in the murder trial that he faced afterwards. After Doc's death, Babe tried several times to go out, dig up the treasure with no success. In 1951, New Mexico declared that the land around Victorio Peak was off limits, it was for military use only, and that no prospecting could be done. And to follow that up, in 1955, White Sands Missile Range expanded their territory to include that land. So what this military claim actually was just for the surface of the land. It didn't include anything below. So what the claim actually said was that anything below was either the property of New Mexico or property of the legal leaser or owner of the land. So that should be Babe, right? Doc was the one that filed the claim while they were married and leased the land. So it should be Babe's. That isn't actually how it worked out, though. New Mexico all of a sudden had no record of Doc Noss ever leasing that land or making a claim for any treasure or for any prospecting rights. Not only that, but New Mexico didn't even own it. It was owned by a man named Roy Henderson, and he was leasing the land to the military. Eventually, a federal court stepped in and said, no one is prospecting this land, it is on hold, and nobody is doing anything until we get all of this figured out. However, the only people that were allowed on the land at the time were military personnel. And all of a sudden, a few military personnel started digging around Victorio Peak. The men that came in and started digging around Victorio Peak were from a nearby Air Force base named Holloman Air Force Base, and one of the men was Thomas Bartlett. Thomas Bartlett and these other men claimed that they found a shaft with 100 gold bars in it, but before they left, they put some dynamite in, they covered it up, they didn't want anyone to find it, they didn't want anyone to know where it was except for them. So they went to the White Sands Missile Range, they claimed that they found this, and that they were the only ones who knew where it was. They were actually given polygraph tests to see if they were telling truth, and they passed. And so the other military personnel, higher ups than them, went out with them to try and find this, and because they had covered it up, they actually didn't know where the shaft was, and they couldn't find it. The base banned these men from ever returning, said you can't come back, and this area is completely off limits. Soon after this, Babe had actually heard about it, thought something suspicious was going on, so she hired a few people to actually go up and see if anything was going on around there. And they did, and they got caught. But they got caught after they saw trucks moving dirt, they saw helicopters up there, they saw all kinds of stuff going on around Victorio Peak. This was in 1961 that these airmen actually found these 100 gold bars, and they were tested. Over the next 10 years, she actually got some help. She enlisted some other people, some treasure hunters, some very rich people. F. Lee Bailey actually got involved and started funding their operations to try and get in. And they actually had a couple expeditions where they went in and they didn't get much time, but they went in and tried to find some things, and they couldn't find anything in the very little amount of time that they were given. Then on June 17th, 1972, several members of Richard Nixon's re-election campaign were caught bugging the Democratic National Committee headquarters at Watergate. This leads to the Watergate hearings, where Richard Nixon's old counsel, John Dean, was asked if there was any other nefarious activities going on during the Nixon White House campaign. John Dean's reply was yes, that he was actually trying to pull some strings to get F. Lee Bailey and some people that he was representing to actually get on to the military base, because there was supposedly a large treasure that was there, and he was trying to pull some strings to get them onto the military base. Another man was actually watching the Watergate hearings. He was the brother of the executive provost marshal of White Sands in 1961. This executive that worked at White Sands in 1961, his name was Swanner, and he actually said that he supervised an operation that excavated $300 million worth of gold while he was there in 1961. It would have been just after those 4 airmen discovered those 100 gold bars. Not only that, but Bartlett, one of those 4 men, actually said that there is no way that once they were banned from that base, that the military didn't come in and take that. He says he claimed that that gold was probably gone before 1964. In 1977, the Army actually allowed F. Lee Bailey and their group, including Babe, to come out and excavate the land, which they did, and surprisingly enough, they didn't find anything. Since then, Babe has passed, but her family is carrying on the legacy, and in the 1990s, they actually took out some radar. They shot it down into Victorio Peak, and they found some caverns and different things like that. And during their excavation, though, they didn't find anything, and nothing has been found since. So hopefully someday the truth will be known, but as it stands right now, there are a lot of people that actually believe that Doc Noss was a fraud and that none of this is true, but it seems to me like there are just too many people who have actually seen the gold, seen the treasure. Other people found gold. There are just too many stories about it to me to think that it isn't true, or at least a part of it is true, right? Anyway, hopefully someday the truth comes out. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, don't forget to like, leave comments, and subscribe. It really helps. Thanks for watching.